want to get going while we can. So thanks everyone for joining us for meeting number 4 for the New York Southeast Steering Committee. Tonight, the majority of it is going to be going over the feedback from the community in the kickoff engagement. So we'll spend a lot of time going over that and talking about how that should shape the vision. So there'll be a lot of discussion amongst the whole committee about that, we hope. But before we get into that, wanted to talk about the in-person meeting poll results. So I had sent out a poll to all of you a while ago now, asking how comfortable folks were with different in-person meeting options for the steering committee. So I wanted to share what we got back from that. We had 20 people respond to the poll, which is pretty much everybody. The first question was, which meeting options were you interested in? Only 2 people, and this one you could select multiple, so it adds up to more than 20. But only 2 people said only meeting virtually. The largest portion, 11, said continue to meet virtually for now, but reevaluate later. 9 folks selected continue to meet virtually, but offer separate or one-off meetings like a tour or a happy hour or something for folks to get together, separate from the monthly steering committee meetings. 6 said alternate between virtual and in-person, and 4 wanted to switch only to in-person meetings. So it seems like the majority are interested in continuing the virtual meetings for now, with potentially the option for a one-off in-person event. And that goes into the second question, which is whether folks would be interested in attending an in-person tour outdoors sometime soon. Again, the majority said yes. A few folks wouldn't be interested, and a few folks said maybe. Some of those, and then we asked, if you said maybe, what your reasons were. Some of those were related to the current COVID situation or current health issues. But with 14 people being interested and another 3 being potentially interested, depending on the specifics, it looks like we will try to get something scheduled. But do keep in mind that to attend this, you will have to provide proof of vaccination to the city. So as we get this scheduled, we will communicate with you how you go about doing that. You don't give it to us. You it goes through our HR department. So we'll give you the information of how that works. But that's the results of the poll. Thanks again, everyone, for taking that. Any thoughts or questions on that before we move on? Right, not seeing anything. So let's get moving. So like I said, most of the meeting tonight going to be talking about what we heard from the community in the kickoff engagement that we started back in July and ran pretty much through the end of September. We've been doing a little bit of focused engagement recently, but the main engagement period was sort of mid-July to the end of September. We had the community kickoff meeting, as you may recall, back in July. The online survey was up for a couple months. We also did events around the community, what we call pop-up events, where we'd set up a table and have a map, and surveys and intercept events where we'd meet folks with just a quick 1-page survey to take focused engagement with groups like students or at apartment complexes, stakeholder interviews with property owners and other organizations, both inside the city and outside the city, and then attended a couple RNO meetings as well over that time period. So during that, we made 1,400 of what we call touch points. That's sort of unique contacts with a person, not necessarily unique people. There's definitely some double counting in there. Folks who attended the kickoff meeting and also took the online survey, that counts as 2 touch points, even though it's 1 person. So we don't have an exact number of how many unique individuals we interacted with, but we use that touch points number. And over 4,000 comments that we got between the survey and everything else we did. So we feel that's pretty good outreach compared to what we've had on other plans. We're pretty happy with that level of engagement from the community, that many comments and touch points. You see on the right here, the neighborhoods that people who filled out the survey or gave us this information, what neighborhoods they live in. You'll see a lot of folks under other, and you'll see some other things later that are a little skewed by, we actually had really good engagement from a survey we did with the George Washington students back in the spring. So a lot of them, even though they go to school in the area, live outside of the 5 neighborhoods of near Southeast. So that's skewed that a little bit. So that's why we have such a high number of other. Otherwise, it's pretty close on the neighborhoods, a little short in Goldsmith, Virginia Village, and Washington, Virginia Vale. But I think if we took out the others, we would see those numbers get closer to the resident numbers. So again, looking at this chart and the next few charts, the purple is what we got from this kickoff engagement, and the gray is census data. So what is actually in these neighborhoods. Gender skews a little female, but not so bad that we're really concerned about that. If you look at the age, that again, the great engagement we got from the GW students shifted that a little bit. So we have really good engagement from folks under 20, mostly high school students. But then you see, especially folks in their 20s and even folks in their 30s are underrepresented, as are folks 80 and over. In the ages, in terms of race, ethnicity, this one is not terrible, but obviously could be better. A little overrepresented on white folks in the area, underrepresented on Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish people, and Black or African Americans. And then in terms of income, this one is skewed wealthier. So under $100,000 in annual income is underrepresented, and especially under $50,000, we're really underrepresented, and everything over 100 is overrepresented. And then the biggest discrepancy is in renters versus owners. So 57% of residents in near Southeast rent their homes, and only 9% of our respondents are renters. Owners were well overrepresented. So that is just the first round of engagement, and we've been working on getting better engagement from renters. Some of the things we were trying haven't really worked, so we're reevaluating that, trying some new tactics in that realm. And we will continue to do that throughout the process. We're hoping as we go through subsequent rounds of engagement that these numbers will start to look better as we get more into the community and start to develop more relationships, and the word gets out better about the plan. But that is a quick overview of who we heard from in this initial round of engagement. Any thoughts or questions on that? Okay. So since we've been talking about engagement, let's talk a little bit about the engagement strategy. You may recall, if you took the survey or when we first talked about this, that we have a draft engagement strategy that we've been working from, but part of that needed to be finalized based on what we heard from the community. So we asked a few questions in the survey and in our engagement activities about the engagement strategy. So I'll go over that briefly. But just as a reminder, the engagement strategy lays out the engagement goals for the plan, describes the methods that we'll use to achieve those goals, talks about how we'll track progress, and like I said, will be finalized with input from you all and the community. These are the draft goals we've been working with. Engage community members who are representative of the area, focus on empowering traditionally marginalized or underrepresented groups in the area, build trust with the community as we go through the plan, and make sure we include that education component as well, so everyone has the background they need to participate fully. So we asked folks how they would like to participate in the process. And you can see here the results. The most popular answer was to take online surveys, followed by attending online virtual meetings and receiving email updates. Probably good to keep in mind that there may be some sort of selection bias in this, that a lot of these results came from people who were taking the online survey, and so they may naturally prefer the online survey. We're reaching the people who want to take online surveys, and they're saying, yes, I want to continue to take online surveys. So we may not be reaching the folks who don't want to take online surveys and would answer differently on this. But for the folks who did take the survey and answer the question, they tend to like the online surveys. And then you can see the other results here as well. Next is, how do folks learn about things happening in their neighborhood? Again, the highest results are from flyers and mailers or from friends and neighbors. And again, there may be a selection bias here in that we sent out the flyer and that drove a lot of people to the survey. And so it worked for the folks that it worked for, and they took the survey and said they heard about it from the flyer. But it may not have worked for the people it didn't work for, and so we didn't hear from them to say what other methods would have worked for them. So just things to keep in mind as we try to interpret these results. And then we asked an open-ended question of what people thought would constitute successful engagement for this plan at the end of the process. Looking back on it, what do you think we would have to do to make for successful engagement? And so this is sort of summary of the comments we heard. Folks want a plan that responds to their concerns. So making sure that their concerns end up in the plan. They want to see how those comments are taken into account. So that transparency element, good communication, constant communication on what is going on with the plan, what the status is, and how people can participate. Making sure we're including everyone in the area and reaching new people throughout the process. Using a variety of methods. So again, surveys and in-person things and different methods and timeframes of when we meet or when things are available. Different people are available during the day or during the evening or on the weekends. So providing multiple opportunities at different times for people to participate. A plan that can be implemented was a big thing that addresses the neighborhood issues. It's not just something that is not specific enough or not detailed enough to be implemented. Some talk of building the capacity of residents or community organizations to continue to engage with the city and participate in things even after this plan is complete, so that we can strengthen neighborhood groups and things like that. Building trust with the community, making it clear that their input matters and that the plan is intended to benefit them. Creating interest and ownership and community cohesion throughout the planning process. And then some folks liked what we've been doing so far and said, continue this trend of strong engagement. So that was an overview of what we heard around engagement. Based on that, any thoughts on thinking back to those goals that I just shared? Should anything be changed or added to with those goals, or any other elements that you think we need to make sure that we incorporate into the engagement strategy, based on what I just shared or based on your experience from the kickoff engagement or anything else? Anyone have any thoughts or feedback? We'd love to get some ideas from all of you, or some feedback, even if you say, no, it looks good. Love to hear what people think.
Scott, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Jim Stone. Scott, I think you're going down the road just perfectly. I mean, from what I've seen and participated in, you're on a good trek. So stay with it.
Okay, thanks. That's good to hear.
I'd like to I'm really interested in the renter situation because I live in a neighborhood that is primarily rental, and I have been kind of driving and walking and biking the neighborhood and the peripheries, and I do see just a lot of rentals, and it's just a shame. So I think that that you guys are trying to strategize away is great, and I'd like to, tell you that I'm going to think about it too. I work in the multifamily industry, kind of know how things work. But I think their thoughts are pretty important. And that we're missing a big population and base that are usually younger and more diverse and more vibrant and could add a lot to our discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. We really do need to get their input because they often have a different perspective on things. Yeah, we will continue to work on that.
It's unfair to think that they don't have a stake in where they live. And,
Right.
Because some people don't just live here for 6 months, they live here for a couple of years or 5 years, and that's not a small amount of time these days.
Yep, absolutely.
Scott, excuse me, it's Paul Cashman. We spoke at my office this afternoon. We're looking at putting out a mailer, door-to-door mailer in the NPI area in the next few weeks. And renters is among the targets we plan to emphasize, letting folks know that we really need their voice, and also looking as well at, same thing you are, at any other options to penetrate the multifamily residential context.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for doing that. Brent emailed me earlier this afternoon about that. So I think that's great. I really appreciate your added effort there.
Hey, Scott, I might chime in here. So as Scott mentioned, we actually have made really great progress with George Washington High School. And I think you'll kind of hear about that in some of our results tonight as we kind of get to that part of the agenda. And so we had an internal meeting today. And I think one suggestion that I think we're also going to work on is trying to also kind of tap into some of those other school communities. So, McMean Elementary, Ellis Elementary, Ash Grove schools. So I think one charge that I might have for the steering committee is, if you have any contacts at any of those schools, I think that's something we might certainly be interested in, because I think that, we might find a lot of young families and even renters, sending their children to those schools. So again, we've had really great success with GW. And so I think that could be also kind of an avenue that we might be exploring here as we move forward. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any contacts or any inroads, so we can tap into those networks as well.
Great.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Jason. Any other thoughts, questions, comments on engagement strategy or engagement in general?
I'm just glad to hear you had the good luck at George, because one of the areas we were talking about was hoping to get into all the schools in the district. It's the NPI is critical to all of their families. And so hopefully we'll get cooperation.
Yeah, GW has been great. They've been really eager to work with us. So we've been really happy with them. If we can get even a fraction of the engagement from the other schools, I think that'd be a huge benefit.
This is more of an observation than a comment, but I just noticed that there's a pretty large discrepancy on the income levels as well as the rent own. And so it seems like those things might be interconnected, and we might be missing kind of some of the same people with those groups.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And that's where our focus has been, is in trying to get more renters. We're hoping that will also correlate to more lower income folks. That you're absolutely right. There's a lot of overlap there, or likely to be a lot of overlap there. So yes, good. Excellent point. Good to point that out. and that's where a lot of our focus has been and will continue to be in reaching the renters, the lower income folks. And we think there's a lot of, as I said, a lot of overlap there, as you said. Also, Scott, welcome. Scott's a new steering committee member that just got appointed. So welcome to your first meeting. Thanks for joining us.
Excited to be here.
All right. Last call. Any thoughts or suggestions on engagement strategy?
Scott,
Yes.
Judy Chris here. I was trying to get the audio, so I missed some of this, but that you were putting on the screen. Did I see that the response from Indian Creek was around 10%?
About 10% of the respondents were from Indian Creek, which matches up about 10% of the population in Near Southeast is from Indian Creek. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Because I sent out a note. I sent out all the notices that you were sending out to all of the Indian Creek HOAs out here. We have, I don't know how many renters we actually have out here. I know of approximately what I have here in my area. We can't go above a certain percent on rentals in an HOA. If you do, then that limits the availability to get governmental loans. So we watch that at least in my HOA. But the rent here is pretty high. It's in my area here, I'm guessing we're doing it around $1,200 or more a month. So I don't know how that compares in other areas, but and I would imagine that that's probably pretty much the norm in Indian Creek.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, and thanks for your work getting the word out. Yeah, as you can see, we've actually gotten pretty good engagement from Indian Creek, matching generally their segment of the population. So keep up good work. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Kathy, you got your hand up?
I do. I just wanted to say when you're talking about the schools, I don't believe any of them are
in District 4, but wow,
we had
great success, except for it's a lot of footwork connecting with schools through the PTA.
and to their newsletters. The thing with Denver Public Schools, at least that we found in our area,
is email.
We literally call,
Show up at we find out when the PTA meeting is.
to get on the agenda. I don't know if it's too late to do that. We've also been about sooner. That's a pretty successful strategy because certain, like what you're talking about, IS and
Mean and
PW, that's definitely people that might be judging
Thanks, Katie. Your audio was sort of cutting in and out and going really muffled for part of that. I don't know if that was just for me or for other folks.
No, I couldn't hear her either.
Okay, I did put it in the chat.
Yeah, can't hear you, Kathy.
Okay, I'll go to the chat.
I think what I got out of what I could hear was connecting with the PTAs in the schools, which I think is a good recommendation. So yeah, any help we could get on that, we'll take it. Jenny, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I know that University Hills North is a small percentage of this whole MPI, but like we have a huge apartment building, a new apartment building in our neighborhood that I know they have a front desk and maybe a big poster or maybe handouts at their desk, and also churches in all these neighborhoods, like a poster or something that they can put on a community board would be a good idea.
Yeah, that's great. And I know we've done some of that. We've had flyers and posters at some of the apartments. I don't know if we got the deco, but I know we've been trying to get that into some of the apartments. Some are open to it, some aren't. We've contacted some of the churches, but we'll continue to work on that as well. Those are both good suggestions. All right, any other thoughts or comments on this? Thanks everyone for your ideas and for the discussion. It's helpful. We will be updating the engagement strategy and putting out the final version here based on this input and your comments. So let us know if you think of anything else or if anything else comes up that you'd like addressed. But thanks for that discussion. So moving on to more of the general comments and feedback we got. As I mentioned at the top, the goal here is to move into developing the plan vision. So we're going to go over highlights of all the feedback we got broken up by topic. And then we're going to have a discussion with you about what should go into the vision and what other issues and opportunities you think are important for the plan to address. But just as a reminder, the vision sets the overall goal for the plan, and all of the recommendations in the plan need to support that vision. The vision must be consistent with Comprehensive Plan 2040 and Blueprint Denver, and as you'll see, will be based on community input. So we've divided this into 5 sections. One is some general overall stuff, and then the 4 topics that we use to divide up the plan. So land use and built form, equity and housing, mobility, and then quality of life infrastructure is that sort of catch-all topic of parks, landscaping, green infrastructure, safety, things like that. So we'll go through each one of those and have a discussion about each one. So as we're going through those, things to think about as we talk about what we heard, what are the most important things that you think need to be included in the vision, right? That are those key high-level things that are so important that they need to be sort of an overarching guide for the development of the plan. What other things that maybe don't rise to the level of vision, but you still think are important for the plan to address that should be included in the issues and opportunities. And then if there's anything missing, if there's something you expected to hear, but you didn't, or anything comes up that you say, oh, why didn't that get any mention? Let us know. And then, as I mentioned, they need to be consistent with comprehensive plan and blueprint. So just as a reminder, the comprehensive plan vision elements of equitable, affordable, and inclusive, strong and authentic neighborhoods, connected, safe, and accessible places, economically diverse and vibrant, environmentally resilient, and healthy and active. So those are sort of the overarching goals of Comprehensive Plan 2040 that we need to be consistent with. And then Blueprint Denver, as you recall, we talked about the vision for Blueprint Denver, which is for an equitable city, a city of complete neighborhoods and networks, and an evolving city. And then Councilman Cashman reminded us that we should be reinforcing the Blueprint Denver commitment to climate that is in there. So I'll let you read this, but I just want to highlight this portion at the bottom that talks specifically about doing new plans and how we plan our city can help us reduce our drain on resources and reduce Denver's carbon footprint to eliminate our collective contribution to the climate change crisis. And that commitment must be our overarching guide. So another thing just to keep in mind as we're developing these plans, that addressing the climate and reducing our impact on climate change is an overarching guide for all of our planning efforts. So with that, I will talk about some general topics before we get into the specific topics. So one of the questions we asked in the engagement was, what topics are folks most interested in? And here you can see the results, and the ones that rose to the top were getting around by walking, rolling, or car, so mobility issues, and then parks, green space, landscaping, recreation, those. And you'll see that sort of throughout everything else, that those are a lot of the biggest topics that rose to the top. Design and development also up there. You'll see, people are interested in pretty much everything. We also asked an open-ended question of what issues people think the plan needs to address. Mobility rose to the top of that one, along with affordability. Climate change and sustainability came up in there. It came up more in these broad general questions than in the specifics, but we will see some additional response to that in some of the topics. Again, development and design, parks and open spaces, and businesses and jobs, and sort of the top things people think the plan should address. And then along with the blueprint vision that we just talked about and the climate commitment, Blueprint Denver also has 10 goals. So we asked folks to select the 3 that they thought were most important for the Near Southeast plan to address in Near Southeast. And so you see the ones that rose to the top here again, connections to the outdoors, environment, natural resources, mobility options is number 2, and then sort of growth and design in there at sort of 3 and 4. So we're starting to see some consistency with folks interested and concerned about parks and climate, mobility, and design and development are the main interests. So that was just sort of table setting. Now we'll get into the topics, and the way we've organized this, again, within the 4 large topics, we've divided them into subtopics. So as we went through all the comments, we sorted them into subtopics and then pulled out common themes within those and sorted them again into things people say they like about the area within these subtopics, things people say they dislike or are concerned about, and then ideas folks have for improving or changing within those. And so we'll have bullets with those themes under likes, dislikes, and ideas. And then you also see maps of, there were a few ways people could put comments in specific locations. And so you'll see where those comments are concentrated in these maps on the right. So the first subtopic is sort of general land use and development issues. People generally like in the area the mix of the urban and suburban feel, shopping areas and local businesses, especially the smaller nodes, and you can see that in the map. The Florida and Holly Shopping Center got a lot of like comments. They like the location of the area and its accessibility and proximity to other places in the city, getting downtown, getting to the tech center, getting to the airport, things like that. They like the character of the neighborhoods, that they're quiet and peaceful. They like that there's an improving sense of community, that's strengthening, and there are more opportunities for connection, and the diversity of the area as well. Things people didn't like are some of the impacts from new development, concerns about more traffic or loss of green space, that there are certain areas in need of revitalization, especially Evans, that came up the most. And again, you can see that in the comments. This is Evans here, which is a concentration of these red dots. This is the old Kmart. So not surprising that we see a lot of those comments along there. Concern about potential change in the character of the neighborhoods with redevelopment, houses getting torn down, rebuilt. Not a lot of draws in the area, not a lot of activities to do within the area. Trouble finding places to walk to for restaurants or other services from the neighborhoods. That there are a fair number of vacant buildings or properties that need upkeep or to be redeveloped. A desire for more neighborhood cohesion and connectedness, and then a concern about rising prices impacting that diversity, that certain folks won't be able to afford to live in the area anymore. And then ideas along these lines, desire for more affordable housing and different housing options, more mixed use areas with businesses and services that people can walk to, Some people want to limit new development and housing in the area. Some folks are more interested in directing growth to appropriate places like the larger streets and making sure that what does get developed has better design over new green spaces and parks. Some people want to keep the overall look and feel, but improve upkeep, make sure things are maintained well. Sustainable growth and sensible growth that preserves what people like about the neighborhood, creating that stronger sense of identity for the area with more destinations, more cultural things, gathering places, entertainment options. Also helping to strengthen the sense of community, more events, creating a friendly and welcoming community, and providing more public amenities. And you can see, again, the location of the comments a lot along Evans, some along Meadsdale in the area. So I'll go through, we have 3 subtopics under land use and built form. I'll go through all 3 of them and then stop for discussion on this topic. So the second subtopic is urban design and appearance. People generally like the look and feel of the area, like the landscaping, the views, scenery, like the scale and location of buildings and development. Some interesting houses, particularly the mid-century modern developments within Virginia Village, but also elsewhere in the area. And generally houses are well maintained and look good. You can see a lot of the green dots there scattered throughout the neighborhood, the residential portions. For dislikes, people have concerns about the design, upkeep, and style of development along Evans and other commercial corridors. And again, you can see that concentration of red dots along Evans, quite a few along Leedsdale, some along Colorado here. Concern about lack of landscaping and lack of medians or landscape medians, poor maintenance of rights of way, utility poles in the corridors. Maintenance and upkeep in residential areas was a concern for some folks, and then that loss of character as some redevelopment occurs. Ideas for urban design and appearance, more landscaping in streets, better medians, landscape medians, more like parkways elsewhere in the city, improve commercial corridors, especially Evans, but others as well, making them more walkable, safer, have better character, more community serving uses and gathering places, better design of buildings and better upkeep of existing buildings, better sustainability and resiliency with that development. Preserving culture and landmarks where we have them to maintain that character that does exist, and improving maintenance of infrastructure, things like better lighting and better maintenance of or location of utility poles. And then the third subtopic under land use and built form is zoning and density. So people like access to commercial areas in other parts of town, like the quiet residential neighborhoods and the single family lower density nature of some of those residential areas. Dislikes are concerns about impacts of new development, traffic, landscaping, parking, things like that. And then some folks had concerns about the group living change that happened was that about a year ago. Ideas in terms of zoning and density. This one we got sort of a spectrum. So I'm presenting sort of a range of what different folks told us. So some people said no new development. Some wanted development only if streets are widened or parks are added, parking is added. So making sure that those impacts are balanced. Some folks are saying limited growth in neighborhoods makes sense with things like ADUs, and then direct other growth to areas like around transit stations and major corridors. And then some folks were interested in more density broadly and looking at other ways to achieve that, like reducing parking requirements to let more people enjoy the existing neighborhood amenities. Where some folks felt less growth would help preserve those neighborhood amenities, or sustainable growth that would help us preserve those while letting more folks enjoy them, and then maintaining a mix of housing options so different types of families can live in the area. So that was a lot of feedback that we got from the community that I went through pretty quickly. So if you have any questions, want me to go back to anything, let me know. But now we'd like to have a discussion about land use and built form topic. What things do you think should be included in the vision of what you heard? What do you think is most important that rises to that level of being guidance for the entire plan? What other issues are important that you want to make sure the plan addresses that need to be priorities? Is there anything that you didn't hear that you think is missing, or any other questions or comments on that? Jared.
Yeah, I might just be the first one to state the obvious, but I'll just keep saying whatever we do with Evans or don't do with Evans will end up being if this plan works or doesn't work. I feel like that every conversation that I have with everybody about our neighborhood, it is about what happens on Evans. And if you've been in the neighborhood in the last couple of weeks, as soon as there was construction on Evans and the traffic increased, like, I mean, it raised the ire of neighbors and the neighborhood, you know, like tenfold. And so I just feel like I just want to be the person that says, if Evans doesn't change, then the neighborhood fails. Like, if we can't find the right change for that, it doesn't matter what else you do. It's like rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. Not that it's a Titanic sort of neighborhood, but Evans is definitely the thing that it is the highest pain point, and whatever solution we come to, it will require pain, right? It's just a question of, will we be willing to like go through the pain of change to create a neighborhood that I think that people want? But every survey, every data point, it all lines up on Evans.
You know, the problem with Evans is the problem of the past. It's the problem of Cherry Creek Drive not coming through. It's the problem of Florida not coming through and having a very wide swath of space that is basically served on the east-west corridor by either Leetsdale or Evans. And, you know, and basically without anything else going in between, and Evans being somewhat limited to only 4 lanes, not that I want it any bigger, don't get me wrong here. It's a tough nut to crack because nobody wants Florida to go through, and there's needs to be another east-west corridor, or Evans, I don't know if it can change.
Well, Councilwoman Black and I have been grouching at the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure for 4.5 years to get a formal full study of Evans. And it's a shame that that didn't get done before this planning process. And I agree 100% with Jared that one thing that has to come out of this process is a firm recommendation recognizing the importance of Evans and that it needs a full study with putting all options on the table. It's just a nightmare the way it is. We're not going to have fewer people in Denver anytime soon that I can see. I'm just not yet. Lisa, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And
it's not a recommendation. It's not a recommendation. It's just, this is what happened, right? I mean, it's just, yeah.
I'm just not willing to give up on Evans yet. So I would just leave it at that.
All right.
The infill that is happening in unincorporated Arapahoe County is also contributing to this. And looking at just what is going in over there after the, I guess it was a wood, some kind of a rural type industry that was sold, and I hadn't been driving by there until recently and saw it's all multifamily that's going up in there. And every place that was vacant land in unincorporated Arapahoe County that is on the border of Denver is going multifamily.
And that's not a bad thing. I mean, it's just going to add to the necessity of really having a big vision on what needs to happen with Evans
Right, and Evans and Quebec as
and
well.
Quebec. Yeah, definitely. I
That's-
thought Quebec was a matter of a study, a separate study,
Yeah, it was. And
or is.
the
I've heard rumors.
Yeah, the study was done. They did a study. Paul is familiar with this because he was the one that pushed for this study. They basically came up with where there would be turns off of Quebec and onto Quebec, etc. I know that they were out here on Quebec the last couple of days. They've been surveying. And Paul, do you know, is that for that additional it's not a lane, but something that they're putting in there to make it so you can turn and gradually get into traffic? Do you know if that's what's going on?
You know, I don't, Judy, I can find that out. But yes, you're right there. Planning on putting a refuge lane in so people can turn left onto Quebec from Iowa.
Right. And they've been out here this week doing surveying. So I thought that was probably what they were about.
Could be.
Yeah. I think one of the other things that we've got here, we still have a lot of speeding, particularly on the southbound side, southbound lane, and motorcycles and loud mufflers. It's noise is a problem, but I know there isn't much we can do about that. But anyway, the motorcycles are really taking advantage, and they're certainly not going the speed limit out here.
Lupe's had his hand up.
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised of what's going down on Evans, especially since we have the Kmart site that is obviously being developed. So there should be a traffic study that's already kind of integrated and been proposed. And you know, obviously there's, I'm assuming that they've already been, to a certain extent, you know, they've gone through entitlement. So there's an aspect of this that we already have data. So it's a question of how do we interpret the data to make Evans better in the future. So I get the idea of having Evans fully studied, sure, but it's not going to tell us anything differently than we already are getting in the piecemeal traffic reports that we're getting with projects that are currently in development. So what is it, do we need to take a look at that just to kind of really tell us, you know, it's the canary in the coal mine? Is it, you know, how is it that this multifamily project is now kind of going to adjust with Monaco and Evans in particular? And then what I don't know is, you know, there's the development that's happening on the south side of I-25 just off of Evans, right? The Texas wrap that's going up. You know, what's happening with that traffic flow, because it's obviously going to lend itself to Evans, and how much of that traffic is kind of thought of as kind of being, you know, go through traffic versus that of being off of I-25 and I-25 kind of digesting it. And so as it relates to zoning, we really made me taking a look at Evans as a potential rezoning opportunity. I'm not familiar with the zoning today, so I'm speaking out of turn. But do we look at Evans, you know, adding to that sense of this, do we have additional multifamily that goes along that way? We accept the results of what that's going to add to the traffic, but then how do we deal with that traffic, you know, as it pertains to the right-in onlys and the left turns and any additional lighting that we need to have? So I would rather kind of, you know, work with the devil that we know at this point, than try to kind of assume that it's all going to get better just on its own.
Okay, Erica, you've also had your hand up.
I just wanted to also note that aside from traffic on Evans, I know a lot of the discussion about Evans has been about traffic, and which is clearly an issue, but also just I think a huge component of what we need to focus on Evans is beautification and making it more cohesive and making it not seem so you know, just full of auto body shops and things that just aren't fun to look at. So I just want to understand what kinds of things can be done. Like what I know that our whole plan is kind of discussing all of this, but are we allowed to kind of dictate to businesses to change signage, to do like, what is possible? I'm not even sure I understand what is possible. So I don't know if that's a topic for right now, but I'm very curious, like what can we do as the committee? You know, is it just what future things that come in? Is that what we can kind of dictate? Or is it really, can we actually dictate things to current businesses that are there? Or I'm not sure I'm putting this into words correctly, but does anybody kind of know where I'm going?
Yeah, no, I think I understand your question, and it's a good question, and it's something we will get into as we start getting into recommendations. At this stage, we're, at that visioning stage, so it's more idealized what you would like, and then we can start talking about what we can actually accomplish and how to accomplish it. But to answer your question somewhat, we have less control over what is there now and more control over what will happen when redevelopment occurs. So we can put in potentially new design guidelines or things like that. So if properties get redeveloped, they come in a certain form or design that is more appropriate for what the community wants there. We have less power to force existing developments to change what they look like or what their signage looks like. But there are other tools around that. So that can be more carrot than stick, right? We can work with like the East Evans Business Association to maybe get grants for businesses to improve their facades or improve their signage or improve their landscaping or things like that. So there are things we can do to encourage folks to improve existing conditions, and also more tools we can use to require new stuff or things when new things come in. And then of course the city has more control over what actually happens within the right of way. So things like landscaping within the streetscape, we have more direct control over that, although that also takes money, which is sometimes hard to come by. So the answer is sort of whatever you would like to see. There's probably a way that we can move towards it. Some of it may be more immediate, some of it may be longer term. And keep in mind, this is a 20-year plan. But at this stage of the discussion, we don't need to worry so much about what is possible or what the potential tools are, but think about what the outcomes we would like are. And then in future meetings in this plan, we will start talking about the tools. So I hope
that's helpful just to know kind of. I think sometimes it's hard to even really know kind of what to envision because it's like, what is possible? Are we envisioning things that are even within our reach, or are we envisioning things that are not anywhere within our reach? So that's helpful to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Jenny.
Thanks. I have concerns about the conflicting responses about the vision from the community about some people wanted to see more development and more diversity in housing, but then others complained that there was more development and more density. And I think that all comes down to Evans. If Evans was a better road for all mobilities and access, it creates great access, but not very functionally. And if Evans worked better, I think the majority of responses would be for more diverse housing and more density. That's I see that as just, I'm adding to that problem, the discussion there. So
See, a couple of hands up from folks who've already said. So before I go back to them, Miranda, you had your hand up earlier. Did you want to share something, or did what you say or want to say get said by somebody else?
Yeah, well, I put it in the chat. I don't know that it's something we can resolve today. I just, I suspect some of the conflicts in the data may break down along demographic lines. And I think that's probably one of the reasons it's really important that we get underrepresented communities to participate in this. And I know you guys have done a lot of work. I'm not saying that we haven't. I think there's probably more to the story than what we're seeing, especially when you see the skewedness of owners and income that we see.
Yeah, that's a fair point. All right, Lupe, you want to go again?
Sure. And I apologize because I just jumped on in the last, 10 minutes where you're going through the various kind of points that were brought up. Could I ask two questions, which is what were the resources that were mentioned of there being a fear of depletion in one of the discussion points?
Yeah, it was, people were concerned about lack of water with new development. And then people were concerned about overuse of green space and parks and things like that.
Okay. And then the second question is, I assume as we go through and the question of zoning is kind of worked through, that we'll probably end up kind of reviewing existing precedents with regards to certain neighborhoods. I know that there's been an amazing a package that was put together for the Rhino design standards. And I assume that will, we'll start taking a look at those and how they associate in other areas of the neighborhood to see what we would basically want to have on our end as well.
Yeah, definitely. We have in our scope to do some best practices analysis and look at examples from elsewhere in the city and elsewhere around the country of
Perfect.
What works well to address some of these. So yes, that'll likely be part of future discussions.
All
right. Councilman.
Yeah, I just briefly wanted to underscore something you said, Scott, and that is the asset that is the East Evans Business Association. The question as to whether we could demand certain types of signage, not under the current situation, but the East Evans Business Association has been begging for help for years. They're more aware than anyone the struggles that road presents. So I think we will find them very willing partners as we move forward in this discussion.
Great, thanks. So we've had a lot of discussion about Evans, and as Jared pointed out and everyone else has reinforced, that is very important, and we're definitely taking note of that. Any other thoughts or comments about anything else off of Evans, either the other corridors like Leedsdale, Colorado, Quebec, or within the neighborhoods that anyone wants to talk about? Yeah, Lupe.
Do we have an understanding of any future improvements that are already in the pipeline that just haven't been brought to, and constructed yet? Do we have a knowing if anything's gonna be widened in the future, or do we have a kind of an understanding from transportation of where they're at?
Yeah, we're not looking at any widenings really. And right now, there's not a lot planned for this area. We're gonna have at one of the next couple of meetings, either in November or December, I'm gonna have hopefully some folks from Dottie come and present about what's going on in terms of transportation, and folks from other departments talking about their subjects as well. So we can get more into that at an upcoming meeting. But as far as like widening any of the major streets, nothing planned now. And generally our policy citywide is not to widen streets or add lane miles. We're looking at trying to encourage folks to shift modes instead of adding lanes. Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, it seemed like a lot of the responses, beyond getting around, it wasn't getting around by car, it was getting around by walking or bicycling or other modes. And I think that response was pretty clear, and as well as just a reaction to being outdoors and climate change. When you went through all of your pages, it seemed like that was a very popular response. So, Evans is certainly, I think, the big, elephant in the room, but just improving the sidewalks. Quebec still has issues, I know that Erica talked about beautification. Evans is harder to crack. There's not as much commercial along Quebec. There is some, but not as much. So taking the bunkers out would be really a nice thing, and making the medians look a little bit nicer, and the old traffic signals and that kind of thing, I think would make a nicer entrance into the east side of the area plan.
Okay, any other thoughts on what is really important? Again, besides Evans, that needs to be included in the vision. Again, this is the land use and built form topic, so we're going to get into the mobility comments and landscaping comments and things like that in a few minutes. But in terms of development, types of development, scale of development, any other issues, anything in the residential neighborhoods, redevelopment or upkeep of houses, anything like that anyone wants to talk about before we move on? Darren. Oh, sorry. Who was that?
I was just going to add, I think going back to some of the larger plan initiatives about like a complete neighborhood and network, I think currently you have a number of neighborhoods that are next to each other but are not connected to each other. And I think as you begin to think about different ways of transportation and mobility, I know that sidewalks are old fashioned, but the fact that you can't move between our neighborhoods on continuous sidewalks, there's something there that needs to be at least continue to be addressed. That's beyond traffic on major roads, but just pedestrian traffic. And connecting the neighborhoods together, I think, is one of the things that could be a win about the land use.
Great. Judy.
There was some comment last week about the Methodist Church property up by Leedsdale and Parker Road. Is that going to be developed, or do you know?
You're talking about the one just east of Quebec there on Parker?
I can take that if you want, Scott.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
So the property that is the former church that's on the right-hand side as you're headed east on Parker Road at Leedsdale, where it turns into Parker and Quebec, that is, so it went through rezoning about a month ago. And what they are going to do there is develop that property into multi-unit housing on one side. So one building will be 4 stories and one building will be 3 stories. And then there will be townhomes on sort of the south side of that property, which are going to be like phase 2 of the project. So they'll build out phase 1 first, and then they'll build phase 2. And they have signed a good neighbor agreement with the owners of the property now, have signed a good neighbor agreement with all of the neighbors in Arapahoe County and the surrounding area to determine things like to ensure that people's views aren't being blocked, to ensure that there are, that there's landscaping and things like that. So that is specific to maintain privacy, things like that. So all of those discussions have happened. They're in place. There is the 2 buildings on the north side of where Galilee Baptist Church sits now. Those they are in site plan review as we speak. So community planning and development is looking at them, making determinations and suggesting changes and recommendations, et cetera. And then those 2 will be developed first. So I would expect to see that within the next 18 months. Hope that was helpful.
So will that be putting more traffic onto Quebec Way to connect with Isla, which is to the south?
Yeah, so I believe that the Good Neighbor Agreement has some specifics about that, but yes, there will be more cars in the area, which means there will be more cars using Quebec Way just in general. There is not a traffic study that's been done yet. They have committed to, because they're not required to for a rezoning. The developer has committed to doing a traffic study, which I believe is in process like now-ish, to take a look at some of those things and see if there are some ways to mitigate that traffic. That's all happening right now.
Okay. I know that unincorporated Arapahoe County does not like sidewalks. But I know people use sidewalks. And I think a lot in that area, sidewalks will be used. Will there be sidewalks?
So this is a little bit of a difficult parcel because half of it is in unincorporated Arapahoe County and the northern half of it is in Denver.
Right.
So for the southern half of that parcel that is in unincorporated Arapahoe County, we have no jurisdiction there. Arapahoe County does. So unclear. I don't know what their sidewalk laws look like. The northern half of the parcel, yes, they will be required to build sidewalks. And what is actually really great about that area is that the Highline Canal underpass under Parker Road is also being built right now. It's a little bit delayed because of some contractor challenges, but it is being, completed as we speak. And that is going to take a huge amount of the traffic concerns away, just in terms of pedestrian safety, because they'll be going under Parker Road through that underpass now, instead of trying to cross Parker Road right there.
Yeah, that is good news for sure. I know that they're still working on Quebec Way, and Paul knows more about that and what's going on there than I do, except I know there was resurfacing that was supposed to be happening, but then there were some utility issues that they had to take care of. So I'm seeing that the north end of Quebec Way right now is still probably maybe waiting until some of this other construction gets done, I'm guessing, before they do any resurfacing. So anyway, there are some other thoughts for the intersection of Florida and Quebec Way, which has had some issues in the past too. So Paul is aware of that, working on that as well. So thank you. I appreciate getting that update.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, thanks, Judy, and thanks, Councilwoman, for the information there. All right, probably need to be moving along. So any last comments on land use and built form that anyone wants to bring up? And we can move along to the next topic. Okay. So up next we have housing and economy, and Libby is going to be going through these slides with you.
Will you click the button, Scott?
I will.
Is that okay? Thank you. So this one we've divided into like about 4 subtopics. So the first is housing affordability and options. So these are the survey results from our kickoff for how available and affordable quality housing options are for different groups. So you can see that most people feel that that housing is fairly good for families and young professionals. And then it's more neutral for residents 65 and older. The next slide. And then for low income residents, fairly bad to find available and affordable quality housing. For residents with a disability, most people don't know. So as far as the likes go for the housing affordability and options, generally residents like the nice homes on larger lots, kind of the suburban feel of the area. The area is more affordable, or people have found it to be more affordable compared to other neighborhoods in Denver, and that there are single family home options. So you can see the green dots on the map represent the like. So this one has the likes, dislikes, and ideas on the same map. But you can see that they're mostly within kind of the residential neighborhoods within the near southeast. Next slide. So overall, the dislikes for the housing were about, increases in the cost of rental housing, as well as, purchasing options, lack of affordable housing, limited middle density options. There's kind of some conflict in that some people didn't like the existing high density residential in the area, and others thought that we need more high density residential in this area. Is also just with increase of prices comes sometimes gentrification and then less diversity in the area. And you can see the dislikes are kind of scattered throughout the area, but mostly kind of near major corridors. And then for ideas, those include more affordable housing, turning existing vacant buildings into affordable housing, providing assistance to attract more young families, diverse types of housing, and also housing that will lead to a diverse population, and then not trying to gentrify certain areas. And you can see the blue, again, they're kind of near like major corridors on the map. And then kind of the second category for housing is quality and quiet neighborhood. So overall, what people like about this area is just the quality of housing's improved. Again, there's larger lots, it's generally quiet. And part of that is because there's no through traffic in a lot of the neighborhoods. There's a lot of cul-de-sacs and windier streets. It's not too dense, there's lots of families. So this one, we don't have the maps just because there weren't a ton of data points. Most of them would show up in like the more single unit residential areas. And then for dislikes, we didn't get a ton of comments on this one, but two that we did get were mostly around just new builds and maybe some unattractive new builds that are happening in this area. And then for ideas, I talked about growth while maintaining the feel of the character of the neighborhood, giving residents resources to help upkeep their property, and then providing, high quality affordable housing. So then there were two questions in the kickoff survey that pertain to economic development and businesses. So most respondents feel that businesses in the area meet their needs somewhat well. And then the top activities they'd like to see in the area are more restaurants, cultural places, outdoor seating, and then entertainment. So for economic development and businesses, this also encompasses so besides those two, as well as arts and culture in the area. So what people like are, they like the easy access to downtown, the Denver Tech Center, highways, that most essentials can be found in the area, that there's a mix of businesses, including locals and chain places. So you can see on the map, the green dots, like the library people like, there's kind of a concentration near Holly and Evans, that shopping area. Along Colorado Boulevard, the mix of businesses, and then Esther's is on there. So then the dislikes are, again, I know we've already talked a lot about Evans. So it's the rundown buildings and strip malls on the major corridors, Evans, Monaco, and Leetsdale. Wanting more amenities within walking distance, more local businesses. There's too many gas stations, storage facilities, and weed shops. And then kind of a lack of like community gathering spaces. So a place to host community events, even things like bars and nightlife, breweries and plazas. And you can see the dislikes are really concentrated mostly along Evans. So some of the ideas for this subtopic were to revitalize kind of the old shopping and strip malls, revitalize Evans, have a hub for entrepreneurs in vacant buildings, improve the look and the quality of businesses. And then kind of a big theme that we saw was just finding more ways to connect as a community. So whether that's through, a Denver Central Market type place, having more walkable neighborhood type restaurants, street fairs, food trucks, concerts in the park, kind of events like that. And so then for jobs, education, and homelessness, you can see there's significantly less comments, but generally people found that there's motivated people in the area. They like the central location to jobs in downtown in the tech center. It's close to quality public schools, and a lot of the schools are walkable from many of the neighborhoods. And then it can be accessible to bike to work if you're close to the Cherry Creek Trail. But kind of the main thing that the respondents didn't like were a lot of the homeless camps and the increase in the homeless population, the group living ordinance, people potentially living in their RVs and campers. So you can see the red dots, a lot of them are kind of closer to parks or open space on the trail. That's where a lot of the comments were regarding homeless camps. And then for education, the quality and the funding of the public schools, and then kind of school segregation within the area. So some of the ideas for this subtopic were to provide micro units for homeless, to have designated outdoor space for camps. Some just said, they don't want to see any homeless camps, to have walkable jobs, invest in our public schools, and then, more community events held at GW. So it's kind of talking about this topic about housing, economic development. Is there anything that should be included in the vision? Any issues and opportunities or things that are most important? And then, or anything that's missing? Yes, Harvey.
Yeah, Libby, you mentioned the word gentrification 2 or 3 times. Are there any areas and are there any areas where gentrification is either started to occur or may occur in the future? So I don't see where this is happening in this area.
Yeah, so I will say gentrification wasn't mentioned nearly as much as like just not having affordable housing and prices increasing. Like that word wasn't specifically mentioned. But we'd have to go look at, we have some data that we can see what % changes in the area, because off the top of my head, I'm not sure. Do you know, Scott?
Yeah, I don't remember for sure. I know, we have a vulnerability to displacement measure that is in our briefing book. You can find that on the website. And my recollection is sort of the western portion along Colorado is more vulnerable to displacement. And I think that's where that was concentrated. So that not necessarily that we are seeing it yet, to your point, Harvey, but that is the area where we are concerned that we may start to see it in the future.
Thanks.
Yeah, Lupe.
Gentrification, for better or for worse, that we've seen it in existing communities, kind of naturally occurs with the rise of home prices, I assume. That then entails higher property taxes, which then kind of pushes out existing communities in some fashion when there's no support for kind of maintaining either that lower kind of rate of property, or there's no way for the cost of living and the property taxes, all that to kind of rectify itself with the kind of growth that happens unfortunately in the way that these communities develop, right? So as we start, there's a plus and minus within this as we start looking at creating these better elements, for better lifestyle choices that happen along Evans, and this becomes a community where people are really wanting to move to. You're going to have that supply and demand issue of of greater home prices, which inevitably is going to start spiking property taxes, which inevitably occurs with gentrification just on its own. So just to kind of get everybody on Harvey's side, just as a heads up, you know, it's going to happen.
And I do believe that this area had some of the highest property tax increases like within the city this past year. If you look, I think a lot of, they post maps online and you can see that this, like Virginia Village, I think in particular, went up quite a bit.
Yeah, and to your point, Lupe, that is sort of the natural cycle, and what we'd like to do citywide, and particularly in this area with this plan, is find ways to mitigate that. And there are multiple tools we'll be talking about as we go through this process of how we can try to prevent that from happening as much as possible.
Yeah, Lisa?
So I think that, you know, some of the results of this study are also just kind of this miscue between this lack of, you know, a response that we got from certain sectors of the population, because, you know, you can't, you know, want affordable housing, but only want single family lots, you know, houses on large lots, or this kind of high quality affordable housing, which I'm not sure what that really means. And, you know, I remember in some of our discussions earlier, we were looking not at just affordable housing for 20 or 50% of median income or 60%, but something maybe in the 75% that, you know, was just more of a subsidized housing for young people, like we subsidize housing for people over 55, would not be a bad idea in my mind, because I like mixed income kind of situations. I think they can work pretty well. So I don't know how we get around this kind of schizoid, you know, we want affordable housing, but we don't want density, and we like large houses on large lots.
Yeah, that's the challenge of the plan, is trying to rectify those things or satisfy everyone, which is not really possible to do. So that's where we would really like guidance from you, and we'll continue to get guidance from the community, but that's where the steering committee can play a big role, is helping us prioritize, right? We're hearing disparate things or conflicting things from the community. So we want your guidance on what is the most important things, which of these conflicting elements should we prioritize? And of course, we also have to be consistent with our citywide guidance, which gives us some direction on things like how we're going to direct or accommodate growth. But yeah, that's what we'd love to hear from you, is when you see these conflicting elements from the community, you know, provide us that guidance on which ones you think we should be weighing more heavily.
Jared?
Yeah, I was just going to say along that line, if you look at I was reading through the briefing book, and it said like our area is supposed to accommodate for about 20% of growth. So obviously there seems to be an assumption that there will be more people moving into the neighborhood. But then when you look at the existing land use, as far as zoning goes, single unit accounts for 44% of the area. Multi-unit is only at 21%. And so I guess the question at some point would be, is this kind of in our purview then to begin to talk about rezoning or addressing zoning issues? Because if you look at, you know, the dominant two neighborhoods of Washington, Virginia Vale and Virginia Village, other than on the major corridors, there's really no zoning for multi-unit. I mean, it's either commercial, and then there's some stuff that I don't understand what public or quasi-public means as far as zoning goes. But I guess that would be my question, is to address the issue of density and housing affordability. At some point, we're going to have to talk about zoning and existing land use. Is that a correct line of logic?
Yes, yeah, we definitely will be having those discussions and potentially putting those recommendations into the plan. And I can answer the public, quasi-public are mostly like civic buildings, churches, nonprofits, organizations like that. Miranda?
Yeah, I think it's more just a comment, you know, Scott, going back to your question about
how to interpret conflicting community input. I think one of the guiding principles of this group and like the city's responsibility is to view everything through an equity lens. And so there's going to be plenty of people who, you know, have moved in and feel quite comfortable here and don't really want it to change. And yet, like, we're facing one of the biggest housing crunches of all time in this city, and we are facing incredible disparities in wealth. And so I think that, you know, like, I don't love homeless encampments, but I don't love them for probably different reasons than other people don't love them. Do you know what I mean? And I think that we have to think about, okay, as the steering committee, it's not really in our purview to decide where homeless people get to be, but regardless, I think a huge part of this is also the strategic communication of how and why decisions are made, and what it means to like be part of a community. Like, you can't say, I really want more of a community feel, but only with certain types of people that I like. And so I think that we need to be really cognizant of like not going down that path, and where we're getting community pushback, be liaisons to talk about it.
Yeah, thanks, Miranda. That was a great point, or several great points. So thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, I should have mentioned that up top, that to keep in mind, along with all the other things I did mention, the equity training that we had last month. And you're absolutely right. We need to be conscious of that equity lens throughout this process as well, and thinking about, right, when we say community, are we really including everybody in that community that is in the area? So yes, great points. Thanks for saying all that.
Yeah, Maria.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Sorry I was late. So yeah, I feel like just kind of following up on what Miranda said, and I think Jared before her, that making the community be for everyone is like really important, and making the neighborhood be for everyone is really important. I think we haven't really talked a lot about like the homeless piece, and I think it's important that we kind of take that into consideration, because it's really only getting worse and not better, especially coming out of COVID, as we are trying to get out of it right now. And it, you know, like the eviction piece is like getting people out of their homes, and I think how we address that now will have really strong implications for like a 20-year plan, and how that's going to look like for those folks in the future. So I think we can definitely, so I feel like something that we probably can keep talking about, but want to make sure that we don't just kind of not talk about it, because it's hard. It's a hard conversation to have.
Awesome. Thanks for those comments. Is there anyone else? What should be included?
One thing that I noticed come up a lot in the feedback is just a general desire for placemaking and activation of spaces, moving more to a human scale rather than being so vehicle centered.
Yeah, that came up over and over again. Just the community kind of gathering space. That's a great comment. Any last comments before we move on? Okay.
All right. Thanks, Libby, and thanks, everyone. Now moving on to mobility, and Jason is going to take us through the mobility topic.
All right, great. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so I was the lucky one that got to go through all the mobility comments. I think, as we've already kind of uncovered, I think, you know, mobility was a very strong, popular topic during our outreach. And so we'll go through these slides here and you can kind of see where some of the comments fell. So before we look at those comments, here are the results from the accessibility questions we asked at the beginning of the Maptionaire survey. We essentially asked how easy it was to use each mode of transportation in the near southeast area. And folks overwhelmingly, find driving to be an easy method to use to navigate the area, and walking, biking, and mass transit to be fairly easy, although there's certainly more variation you can see here between those results, and we'll get into that here right now. Go ahead, Scott. Oh, there we go. So again, we had so many comments for the mobility topic. What I kind of wanted to do here with this first slide is kind of start at a high level with these comments and then kind of take a deeper dive into some of the subtopics. And so what you're looking at here is kind of a map of every single comment that we identified as falling into kind of this mobility category. These comments, of course, are divided by the likes, which are the green here, the dislikes in the red, and finally the big idea in the blue. And then you're going to kind of find through these slides that I also have call outs, which kind of document spatially where a lot of these comments were placed. And so at a high level, I think while many folks that took the survey and gave us feedback enjoy the flexibility and ease of commuting with a personal vehicle, the vision we heard over and over was that the area should, be designed in the future to make it more easier for alternative modes of transportation. So, as you can see here, that includes safe, accessible, well-maintained sidewalks, safe and accessible bike lanes, and more improvements to last mile connections to get people from transit centers, bus stops, and other mobility options. And we also heard, a lot of comments around the elimination of all traffic injuries and fatalities, which is, of course, in direct correlation to the Vision Zero goals of City Denver. So you're going to hear a lot about this throughout our process. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Vision Zero, that's the city's overwide goal of having zero traffic related deaths and fatalities and serious injuries by the year 2030. So it was great to kind of see some of those comments, throughout our analysis here. And so looking at the likes here, within near Southeast, many folks do enjoy the central location of the neighborhoods and being able to walk to restaurants, shopping, and civic uses like schools and libraries in the area. This also includes the proximity to larger regional centers like downtown and Cherry Creek. Overall, while some of the major thoroughfares in the area can be loud and congested, I think a lot of folks reported that they like kind of the quietness of the neighborhood streets, and they love having, kind of a mature and robust tree canopy that does make walking and biking, enjoyable along the community and, within those streets. And so areas where we saw the majority of the like comments, not surprisingly, include Cherry Creek, the Highline Canal, and then of course the two light rail stations at Colorado Boulevard, and then also Yale. And switching gears here to the dislikes, we've already discussed a lot of this, in this particular map, certainly details some pretty important trends here that we've already kind of talked about when it kind of comes to dislikes with the mobility topic. It comes as no surprise that Evans Avenue certainly led the charge, followed by Leedsdale Drive and Colorado Boulevard. Those are really kind of the three major corridors that were constantly called out in some of these negative comments when it came to mobility. And those comments really kind of centered along kind of this concern for increasing traffic, as well as traffic violations, congestion, and then of course, as a result, kind of unsafe walking and biking conditions, not only along these corridors, but certain intersections, as you can kind of see here, were also identified in these negative comments. And so also heard a lot about how people, they know that transit exists, but they're deterred from using that public transit just because of cuts in service, low frequency, and the condition of some of the bus stops and bus shelters in the area. Those were also some of the negative comments we heard when it came to public transit in the area. All right, so the big ideas. So when looking at this particular category, we do see direct correlation within the dislikes, as these ideas all seem to kind of be ways to improve some of the mobility concerns. People overwhelmingly would like to see investment in pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure that connects the neighborhoods to schools, businesses, parks, as well as other commercial and recreational amenities. So Jared, I think this is something that you touched on. earlier, and a lot of your neighbors certainly share that same idea, thinking of ways that we can better connect the neighborhoods by walking and biking. And so, examples that were constantly thrown out here include, better sidewalk conditions, north-south bike lanes, as well as improving RTD ridership. So again, kind of tapping into some of those concerns and negative realities, I think, that people seem to face when it comes to mass transit. Okay, and so, the majority of these comments, kind of diving a little bit deeper into them, really kind of centered along kind of two main categories. So the first is walkability and bikeability, and also kind of this topic of vehicle and cars. And so I separated these comments into the next two slides to kind of give you a little bit more of a detailed look, to dive a little bit deeper into kind of what those comments consisted of. And so starting first with walkability and bikeability. When it comes to this subtopic in the area, residents believe that there are, really many options for walking and biking, including, access to regional trails like the Highline Canal and Cherry Creek, and also major destinations like 4 Mile House. But that being said, there needs to be investment in alternative modes of transportation to make it safe and easier, and encourage more folks to actually use these alternative modes. And many went so far as to say that really, within these neighborhoods, the pedestrian should be the priority, the number one priority when it comes to mobility in the area, and that there should be improvements to streetscape, sidewalk conditions, as well as crosswalks at all of the major intersections within the area. And so the two kind of top locations when it came to identifying these, walkability and bikeability comments were Cherry Creek and Evans Avenue that you can see here on the map. And then last but not least, everyone's favorite topic, as I mentioned, I kind of grouped these subtopics, and vehicle and cars was certainly one of those top conversational items. And you can see here that traffic, came up quite a bit. I have it listed here 3 times. I think that, honestly, most folks that had a mobility comment mentioned traffic or congestion in some type of manner. And residents are really, frustrated with increasing traffic and a lot of the noise and the traffic violations that come with that, as well as kind of some of the pollution, obviously. And Scott will kind of get into some of these comments here in just a bit. And so, with increases in traffic, I think a lot of residents have recognized that, there seems to be more and more unsafe intersections, as well as, crossing those intersections. And then also comments related to some of the crumbling infrastructure as a result of, the traffic and folks that are driving in and out of the neighborhoods. And so, and it's not all bad, is again, I do think that people recognize that it is very easy to navigate these particular neighborhoods, and there's plenty of on-street parking, and the kind of this quiet residential street that I think Libby talked about quite a bit. So so there definitely is some good when it comes to the cars and the vehicles, but certainly I think a lot of things that we can we can use this plan to improve on moving forward. And then finally, I kind of wanted to end on this topic of transit. And so you may have noticed, I certainly brought this up in some of the comments that I just brought up to you guys. But there wasn't a lot of comments related, overall to transit, especially compared to some of the these other kind of subtopics. And so, again, I think I found that it's not that people don't use transit, but it was very evident that it's really kind of not this popular mode of transportation in the area. And, many don't rely specifically on public transit to kind of commute around the area. And so, that being said, at the very beginning of this meeting, we talked about some of the outreach that we've done with George Washington High School. And, over the last couple of months, I think we really noticed, and it was very eye-opening that, of course, many of these students, not only within the study area, within our, neighborhood plan area, but outside of the area, they do rely on public transit. And so I kind of wanted to point this out, that there was a kind of a big discrepancy between the amount of transit comments we heard from those students versus, the larger neighborhood. And so it's something that I just kind of wanted to bring to the steering committee's attention, because this really is for a lot of students that only form of transportation. And the feedback from those students, as well as those that kind of live within the area, was that you know, unfortunately, a lot of times the transit, you know, bus can be slow, unsafe, and the bus stops felt, you know, dirty and kind of uninviting in certain situations. Many also felt that it was difficult to get to the bus stops and that there should be improvements made to make it easier for those that walk, bike, or roll to the bus stops on a daily basis. And, you know, students were actually very specific in some of their recommendations, including making it easier to, you know, access bus passes, as well as, you know, reload some of their bus passes and vouchers in the area. And so even identifying locations where it might be easier for them to have access to doing so. So kind of wanted to end on that note because it, you know, it wasn't that transit didn't come up, but it was just kind of interesting to see, you know, how it was really kind of a key focus for the students at George Washington High School. And so with that, we'll transition here to that last slide. And so, you know, we've already talked quite a bit about Evans, and I think I've taken great notes on kind of how the steering committee feels about that and kind of how that should kind of certainly be included in the plan. But, you know, what are some other aspects of mobility that I kind of went through here that you felt were, you know, really important to kind of elevate to that level to make sure that it is kind of included in the vision? And then maybe more importantly, is there anything that that we've missed, or that, you know, that we've missed in the comments? And maybe other things that you're hearing from neighbors. So let's go ahead and open up the discussion on mobility. Lisa, it looks like you raised your hand first. So why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Number one. Well, the survey showed that most people obviously do get around by car. So because they found that that was the most popular and easiest way to get around. So it's not, you know, some of it is if you build it, they will come, right? But and I think that, you know, what we're seeing here is a really good reaction that people would like to transition and have their neighborhood transition away from this reliance on the car. So I guess some of our goals are going to be, how do we do that? I thought the interesting thing about the more north-south bike paths, and I congratulate the city putting in some on Florida and Jewel, as I remember, Paul, am I correct? Florida and Jewel. And those are, that's really nice. To be honest, I like to bike around myself, and I, you know, don't always want to ride the Highline Canal or Cherry Creek. So having a nice, safe bike streets and lanes to get to shopping and things like that, Colorado Boulevard and other parks is very nice. So I'd say more mobility on the streets and more mixed use in areas that it can be done is a nice way to increase and encourage bicycle use for small trips.
Great suggestions, Lisa. Erica, looks like you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to say, you know, I completely agree with Lisa, and I think that, you know, the trend should be towards alternative forms of mobility, but at the same time, there will be a lot of people who still use cars, and I think a big transition will be towards electric vehicles in the future. So charging stations being incorporated into the plan, I think would be really important. And because I know that there's a big shortage of that, you know, currently. And so I think that that's something we really need to think about. And one other just small point I wanted to make about, there's a street it's Oneida. It connects Yale and Evans. It's kind of the neighborhood I live in, and it's become kind of a pass through. It's usually a pretty quiet street, but because it only connects those two streets, a lot of people have been dodging Quebec, dodging other streets to kind of get from one point to another. And they've been racing through what's normally probably like a 25-mile-an-hour street. There's only one stop sign really coming through that whole neighborhood. And I know a lot of my neighbors have been concerned about how cars have been flying by. So I don't know if maybe a speed bump or two or an extra stop sign on that street might be really helpful as a deterrent for racing cars through slow, maybe additional stop signs through even other neighborhoods where there are, you know, it's very residential, more of a pass through. Adding some stop signs or speed bumps might be a good thing. As much as I hate a speed bump, you know. Thank you.
Yeah, great suggestions. And those are certainly, you know, recommendations that we will look to down the road. And I think you're absolutely right, Erica. I think as as many people said that, their neighborhoods were quiet, I think they also acknowledge that at times there is cut through traffic, and whether it's based on, a result of construction, or maybe folks just kind of have their shortcuts. And so, I see Dustin put roundabouts in here as another, in the chat as another example of maybe these traffic calming measures that I think a lot of folks in the community have already kind of started thinking about, and that was kind of their big idea moving forward. So yeah, great suggestion. I think it's something that we'll certainly look at down the road. Jared, let's go to you.
Yeah, just on the sidewalk issue, I was looking at the brief book again, and it seems to be that there's a limited number of north-south. Somebody was talking about north-south mobility in the neighborhood, and trying to figure out, Holly seems to be the street that needs the most improvement as far as continuous sidewalks, because there's both missing sidewalks and sidewalks that are less than 4 feet. And having kids in our neighborhood walk up to George and down, that seems to be kind of one of the points where that could be like an easy improvement, is figuring out how to have a continuous sidewalk north-south through all the neighborhoods that would be able to connect kids to schools, to shopping centers, and to the Cherry Creek Trail, and all the way eventually down to Evans, where a lot of them do RTDs at.
Great, thank you, Jared. Before we move to our quality of life discussion, are there any other comments that folks have about the mobility topic? Oh, looks like Scott Caldwell, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hi there, thanks. I think you've covered a lot of this, but I just wanted to emphasize that transit's going to be a really important aspect of mitigating this traffic. And so I think people are inclined to want to look at different modes, bicycling or riding transit. But and they'll do that if it's affordable, it's easy to understand and get to, and they feel safe. And so those three things to me are really important. And so in order to do that, I think you have to have good programs for, and you mentioned eco passes or other mechanisms to make it more affordable or easier to use. I think sidewalks are important, and connectivity, some of those things. So I just think, people are going to continue to move here. I think you can mitigate traffic by creating mixed use amenities, so multifamily with neighborhood retail, things around it. I think we've talked about connectivity from neighborhood to neighborhood. I think that's really important, and bicycling. And so you're covering all these topics, but I do think that the transit system needs a lot of improvement, just functionally, and how you access it and use it.
Great comments, Scott. Thank you. Lupe, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I have to say that what I've really appreciated within the most current markings of the bike lanes is that it's been three-dimensional, meaning that unlike other bike lanes that I've seen kind of in other neighborhoods where you're relying on reflectors that oftentimes get covered up in the winter, and there is no definition, I'm really appreciative of the fact that it's been thought through and there's a level of kind of reflectance on those. I'm hoping and encouraging that same stance or even a better option for us will push us into this next kind of version of how do we separate the traffic from the other elements of mobility. And obviously, I think what's already been kind of mentioned is that's really going to be the key element that I'm hoping is a touchstone in this kind of opportunity for potential rezoning, especially in heavier corridors that we face on Evans and other kind of major Leedsdale and other major kind of thoroughfares.
Great comment. Thanks, Lupe. Lisa.
So I'll make this quick. We talk about carrots and sticks, and we talk about car use, and I'm just going to use my own example of South Quebec Street. We've got at the very end a little traffic study, speed limit sign. It shows you how fast you're going, and the average is 45 or more, 45 or 50. And, we're just creating these corridors that we're making it so convenient. I've got to get to the tech center from Lowry. So I'm going to go down Quebec and I'm just going to go like a bat out of hell. And I realize that not a lot of people like driving 35 or 30 miles an hour, but we have spent our whole lives making driving a single occupancy car really convenient and quick and easy. And so we have to think about doing something different.
Yeah, great comment, Lisa. And again, I think that, based on what we saw in the comments, I think a lot of your neighbors would agree with you. So, okay, anything else before we transition? Scott, it looks like I left you about 10 minutes.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric. Before we move on.
Really quick, I just wanted to say that I do think if we can focus on new developments where we have restaurants and bars and places people want to go within the areas of the neighborhood, biking and less car use will kind of be a result of that, because people will want to just walk to their neighborhood eatery rather than get in their car and drive further. I think that things like that can actually really help our transportation issue if we kind of make things more attractive to walk to within the neighborhood.
Yeah, definitely.
Great comment.
All right, thanks everyone, and thanks Jason. As Jason said, we got about 10 minutes left, so I will try to get through this. We may go over a little bit here, and then we can follow up next month if we need to. But the last topic is the quality of life infrastructure, which is a sort of catch-all for a whole bunch of other stuff. This will mostly focus on sort of parks and greenery with a little bit of other stuff. Yeah. Again, we had some survey questions asking how well parks and rec centers meet needs for gathering with friends and family, exercising, sports, being close to nature, and generally folks found that the parks were meeting their needs very well or fairly well. So that's good. And you'll see that in the comments that people really like the parks and think they're a big asset. So the first subtopic is about parks and trails. And you can see the abundance of green dots on the existing parks. Clearly people really like the parks and the trails. So they like the access and the amount of parks. They like the trees and the landscaping and the large open spaces within the parks. They'll let them do different things on those green spaces. Folks really like the Cook Park Rec Center, and then really like the trails, Cherry Creek Highline and Goldsmith Gulch, both for providing green space and for using for mobility purposes. Dislikes, a desire for more parks and more green space and improved access to them. Concerned about losing parks, green space, trees as things redevelop and change. Some concern about lack of certain amenities. We heard a lot about dog parks, other things like playgrounds for children, or certain courts like basketball courts, or shelters and picnic tables and things like that. Some concern about maintenance of the parks, cleanliness and safety within the parks, and enforcement of rules like leash rules for dogs. And then also safety on trails, a lot concern about conflict between different modes, people walking concerned about people biking by too fast, or people biking concerned about people's dogs getting in the way, things like that. Ideas for parks and trails: preserve the existing parks and add more, improve the access to parks, improvements to the rec center, expand it, add indoor swimming, add more services, more classes, things like that. More features and amenities within parks. I mentioned dog parks, playgrounds, skate parks, shelters, bathrooms, courts. Better enforcement of rules and better maintenance and upkeep of the parks themselves. More trees and better landscaping within the parks. More events and festivals and things to do in the existing parks. More or better recreational leagues for sports and things like that. Improve safety and ADA access, especially crossings getting into and out of the parks, and improve connections to and from the trails. The trails are great, but sometimes getting to them could be better. The second subtopic is landscape and climate. Some people really like landscaping in the area and the views within the area and some of the scenery, and again, the trees and landscaping in the parks. Some concern about overgrown landscaping or landscaping that needs better maintenance or upkeep, also places that are missing landscaping, especially the corridors like Quebec and Evans. And then ideas, improved landscaping, better maintenance, better climate appropriate landscaping that uses less water. For new development, require strict landscaping rules about how much is required and what type it is, including requirements for things like xeriscaping. Adding more trees throughout the area to help mitigate heat impacts and reduce noise and pollution. Sustainable development in general, better transportation and sustainable transportation to mitigate climate impacts. So getting into that electric vehicle conversation that we started to have. Better sustainable water use and making the area more energy friendly to reduce energy use. And then the last subtopic is health and resources. So people like the outdoor amenities to help them get exercise and improve mental health, and access to a variety of medical services in the area as well. Concerns about the quality of food in the area, too many fast food restaurants, so better access to healthy food and local produce. General feeling is that there's less crime in the area than other parts of the city potentially, but that the crime rate is increasing. So some concern about increasing crime within the area. Trash and neglected streets and properties, and then increase in traffic and pollution that goes with that. And ideas include improving streetscapes with better streetlights to make things safer and easier, more community activities, better investment in getting more people using the area to improve safety, and then alternative forms of energy to, again, complete that energy shift and improve our climate impact. So I ran through those quickly. We've got just 3 minutes left. If folks are willing, we can let this discussion go a little bit past 8. I know if folks need to drop off, that's fine as well. We can recap at the beginning of next meeting. But with that, I'll open it up to discussion on this. Same questions we've had the last few times. So any thoughts on parks, climate, landscaping, health, access to food, safety, things like that? Not that everybody just wants to be done. It's 8 o'clock. Scott, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing. I think a lot of this stuff relates to the other topics. And so if you're creating neighborhood amenities that have some open space or dog parks and not necessarily green, but maybe they're just communal areas. And so, those people will congregate. And I think this was mentioned earlier by Erica. Those people will congregate in those neighborhoods and not necessarily have to get in their car and drive someplace else. So that helps your traffic. And so again, I like green space and parks, and I think those things need to be improved as well and well planned. And we need to preserve what we have. But I think some of these areas can be created through creating places, and do that thoughtfully and in different areas of the neighborhood. One other thing I'll just share, and then I'll go, is I sit on the board of the Transportation Solutions that services this area. And in our last meeting, they've developed a bike map that shows all the bike routes throughout the area. I don't know, Scott, if you've seen that. And if you haven't, I can try to get a copy of that and send it to you. But I think it's pretty informative about what routes exist, and then maybe that's a place that we can start with to look at how to improve it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we have the bike map. So Ashley, who was at your last meeting, we meet with her.
Okay, great.
So she's given us all that information. But yeah, that's a great point.
Great.
Councilman.
Yeah, so we're talking quality of life, Scott.
Yep.
What stuck with me from our last meeting, and I think it kind of got off almost in a lighthearted direction with people remembering the old Rainbow Music Hall on Evans. And I've been thinking about that a lot, and what a change it would be if we had some sort of an arts district performance space, you know, in near Southeast Denver. Doesn't need to be a big rock and roll arena, but you know, there are a lot of quality small theater groups around town, and to have some sort of performance space and arts thrust, I think would really go a long way to changing the personality or enhancing the personality of these neighborhoods. So I just wanted to pitch that again.
Yeah, no, definitely. That, you know, is consistent with a lot of the comments we heard about more draw in the area, more entertainment options, creating that sense of identity in the area. So absolutely. Lisa.
Well, I'll say good evening, hopefully soon, but certainly there's not a big part of the Highline Canal in this area. It's mostly the Cherry Creek. Some improvements have been made. You know, it could use a little bit sprucing up because we've got kind of competing visions right outside our boundaries of the new thing that's happening to the south, and Glendale actually has pumped a lot of money into Cherry Creek. So there's that section that goes through ours that could use some beautification. But its connection is pretty good, and the bridges are working well. But there are a couple places that meet right at the intersection outside of the boundaries that are just god awful dangerous, which is basically the Highline Canal at Yale, which I've almost got killed at many times. And so, you know, I know that they're outside of our area, and I don't know how we can address them. But there's more than one, and you know, even inside of our areas of bicycle crossings that are dangerous. So I hope we can address them in more particularity as we go on.
Yeah, absolutely. And specifically about the Yale crossing on the High Line, that was in the latest bond.
Yeah.
So hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll be seeing improvements to that. Because yeah, absolutely, that I've also almost gotten hit crossing the street there. So it is a couple minutes after 8. So if anyone needs to leave, I want to let you go. Just wanted to give a brief summary that we will be taking all of this and all of the feedback you gave us and working to draft some vision statements that we will bring back to you next month in November, and go through those with you. Hopefully we can get to agreement on what should be in the vision statements at that November meeting. So look forward to that at the next meeting. And so if anyone needs to drop off, go ahead and do that. If anyone has more comments they want about quality of life infrastructure, we're still happy to take those. So thanks everyone. If you need to leave, thanks for your time tonight and your wonderful discussion. Really appreciate it. Lupe, go ahead.
Yeah, quick question, because, you know, I think what we're really looking at along areas like Evans is the opportunity to provide that additional rezoning. That's going to provide for the, you know, percentage of, or, you know, distance of how sidewalks and frontage works, and parking analysis, and all of that is going to really start to improve those kind of corridors. I do have a question as it relates to the current construction that's happening where there's a strip mall just east of Dahlia Street on Evans. It appears that that's fenced off, and I'm assuming it's going to be demoed to some extent. But do we know what's happening with that? Because we could just basically be, if we're not too careful, and if, you know, obviously everybody's coming in within current zoning, we're never going to improve Evans if there's immediate things going in. And I kind of fear that strip mall may just be a repeat of what we already have on our, you know, as it relates to the sins on Evans.
I don't think I know, because that's not the Carvana you're talking about.
It's going to be a gas station, a Maverick gas station. I confirmed that with Kendra Black's office. Not too happy about that.
Yeah, I think that just further emphasizes Lupe's point, right? That we are going to continue to get the type of development that the community doesn't seem to want this area until we are able to get new regulations in place.
Sure. Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Thanks, Jenny. All right, any other last minute thoughts on quality of life infrastructure? Jared, go ahead.
I was just going to echo Councilman Cashman's statement. I think a reason to stay in the neighborhood actually helps a number of issues. And so I think the things that we've got going for us is green space and the trail. And so somewhere along the line, trying to figure out how to create a vision that incorporates either some sort of economic engine that connects to our green space and our trails, or some sort of an event space that connects to our green space and our trails. Like it is the one thing that everybody loves is the Cherry Creek Trail and the park. So if we can figure out a way to help people stay in the neighborhood, I think that'd be great as far as quality of life, rather than feeling like I need to go to somebody else's neighborhood, that there's something here for me to stay in.
Yeah. All right, anyone else on quality of life or any other topics? Did you think of anything else that you wanted to go back to on any of the previous topics?
Scott, I might have missed this, but I don't know. Has there been any discussion tonight about Evans Avenue?
Jason's been taking notes for us, so I'll have to go back and double check.
Yeah, get back to me on that, would you please?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Councilman Cashman, I haven't seen anything yet, but I'll dig a little deeper.
All right, with that, thank you everyone for the discussion tonight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for sticking around a few minutes past 8. We will, as I said, be working on drafting vision statements and come back with that in November. And also, as we discussed at the very beginning of the meeting, we'll be looking at trying to organize some sort of tour or something for everyone who is interested in participating. Hopefully we can find some nice weather here in late fall. Thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening and have a good October, and we'll see you all in November.
Thank you.